Hello and welcome to day 5 of 13 Days of Halloween. My name is Dylan Lang. For those who don't know, I run a page here on YouTube called Dylan Knows, where I've been doing a weekly show for 11 years. Yep, I'm over almost close to 600 episodes. Maybe a little bit more than that. It's like 500. I'm in the 570 range, but still not that far away from 600 episodes. And I've done other smaller little things here and there. This show, which is kind of what this is all about, and conversations with yourself where I talk about just one topic for a whole episode. And I've got a few other ideas coming up, including in the defense of, where I defend things that people don't like. And I'm also going to be doing my massive in defense of the MCU once I get all those things. That probably be till 2025. But I will be working on that soon. But we're not here to talk about that. As part of my list show, I've decided I was going to do something unprecedented that I've never done before, which is do a episode a day for 13 straight days. Since it's Halloween, one of my favorite holidays, I figured, why don't we do it? So I've already done 5, technically 4 episodes. My 5th one was my regular show, but it still counts because I did do a regular show during the week. So, and I still have 8 more days, one of which I will not be personally involved with, but my daughter will be the one involved with it. So it still counts as being a show a day. And that's not till next Tuesday doing that. But today, yesterday, we did the best Tim Burton movies. I think one of my best episodes I've ever done. This one is probably not going to be one of my best episodes because while I'm a John Carpenter fan, I am a much bigger Tim Burton fan, so I had a lot more to say about Tim Burton and maybe not quite as much about John Carpenter. But that being said, John Carpenter's had a very interesting career. He has a lot of high concept ideas. He has weathered most of his movies being box office bombs. Not all of them, but a lot of them have been. And then those movies go on and become cult status films. So it's kind of interesting with that. This is a list show. This is my list show. This is my movies that I picked. These are the order I put them in because it's the order that I like. And the list is fluid. Even though this is the list that I have now, this might not be the same list of John Carpenter films I have in a couple years, next year, 6 months, whatever, depending on if I watch some of his other stuff or I rewatch a movie and I think, hey, I like this better than one I just watched, which I didn't like, and they were different numbers. So again, my choice. So if one of your favorites is not on the list, you can make your own list. You can comment if you want, but this is still my list, and it's not going to make a difference. And you can be, as mad as you want, bro. But it's my list. So if you want to talk about how good that movie is that I didn't have on my list, then you should do your own show, right? I do have usually one honorable mention, but in this case, I have 2 for a specific reason, which I'll tell you about now. So here are with the top 10 best John Carpenter films, starting with our honorable mentions. Usually I only have 1. I have 2. The 2 I have are Prince of Darkness and In the Mouth of Madness. You would think that they are 2 completely different films, and you'd be right. But John Carpenter has come out and said that these 2, along with The Thing, are part of a trilogy that he calls the Apocalyptic Trilogy. They're not connected in a universal way like the MCU, but in John Carpenter's eyes, these 3 movies, John Carpenter's The Thing, John Carpenter's Prince of Darkness, John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness, are all connected in one trilogy, and they're all about apocalyptic stuff. And again, they're quite different movies, and they're all quite interesting ideas. Prince of Darkness is a crazy story idea about a vial of evil that supposedly, if opened, releases the devil onto the world. And a bunch of scientists decide to test that theory. And then In the Mouth of Madness, John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness is a very early-esque sort of Cthulhu-style sort of movie. Prince of Darkness, honestly, I liked it a lot better than In the Mouth of Madness. And I think Prince of Darkness is this close to maybe making it on the list again. But for this time right now, I'm going to keep it here. But it is as most John Carpenter's movies are, they are more, with his horror movies, I should say, they're more, atmospheric, with the every once in a while a little bit of graphic violence and stuff like that. But it's a fairly good movie. Prince of Darkness, I absolutely really like a lot. And Mouth of Madness, I have some issues with, but that's just me. But that's his more polished 1990s movie. Prince of Darkness is a 1980s movie, and The Thing is an early 1980s movie. So you get all kinds of that. We'll talk about The Thing later, though. Number 10 is a movie I actually saw in the movie theater, and is one that I could probably flip-flop Prince of Darkness with, because Prince of Darkness is such a really interesting idea. And this one is based on a book that's a kind of interesting idea, but it's also brings out a shit ton of misogynistic scenarios and stuff like that. It's vampires. James Woods is in it, Daniel Baldwin. And the basic premise is James Woods heads a group of vampire hunters that is funded by the Vatican. And their job is to, during the day, flush out vampire hives, which are places where vampires rest during the day, and then you come out at night. They go in during the day when they are easier to kill and not as aware of stuff, and could be easily killed. Even if they get out and try to attack, they wake up from their slumber to try to attack the vampire crew, because it is still technically day out. So after one successful cleansing of a hive, these boys, who are all cowboy, manly, macho, conservative, with James Woods being in it, of course, they're very kind of conservative, MAGA Republican types, who party, drink hard, get some prostitutes, and treat them like shit, slap them around a little bit, fuck them, but they get paid for the money, stuff like that. Call them bitches and hoes and fucks and like that. But what they don't realize is the hive that they attacked, they missed one guy, and he's one of the strongest vampires out there, and he decides to get revenge. So this vampire, who is one of the strongest ones, comes upon the hotel where all his James Woods' band of vampire hunters are, with the prostitutes, and he wipes the majority of them out, leaving James Woods still pretty much kind of alive. Daniel Baldwin alive-ish, but I think he's been bitten, but maybe not yet. And the actress who played Laura Palmer, I forget her name right now. Cheryl something. Killing me. Cheryl Lee. Yep, Cheryl Lee plays the prostitute that takes a liking to James Woods' character, but she also, I think, gets bitten also. And so they escape the slaughter and meet up with a new liaison with the Vatican. And eventually they somehow discover, how did this vampire discover our location? How did he survive? That sort of thing. And they discovered that the head of the Vatican group that runs the vampire group has turned and wants to help the vampires, take over. And so it's up to James Woods, Daniel Baldwin, Cheryl Lee, and this new liaison with the Vatican, who James Woods treats as a piece of shit for the majority of the movie. And they have to take down the vampires and the big guy, as well as fight the Vatican at this. It's a decent idea. But I just said the misogyny and the just pure straight up macho bullshit that I am not the biggest fan of really kind of wrecks it for me a little bit. And the more and more I think about it, I should have put Prince of Darkness there, but I'm not. This is my decision right now. I did see Vampires in the theaters because Cheryl Lee was in it. I'm a Twin Peaks freak, and it looked interesting. And look, it has its moments. It's a action vampire horror film, and it's straight up just kind of a something you really haven't seen before in a straight up vampire film, an actual like action film where the vampires are the bad guys instead of some East German bad guy. Number 9 is one of Stephen King's lesser novels, earlier novels, that still is fairly iconic, and most people know what it is. And the fact that John Carpenter, this is the Stephen King book he decided to adapt and make. It's Christine, about a killer car. And then that's really all you need to know is about a car that's possessed and has feelings for the possessed car, has feelings for the owner. And when things start going a little south, the car takes out its vengeance on the people that have wronged the owner of the car. It's, and again, not a John Carpenter original. Prince of Darkness, I think, was. Vampires was an adaptation. Christine was an adaptation. As I said, fairly decent movie, a good adaptation of a Stephen King book. And we'll talk about it probably a little bit tomorrow when I do my Stephen King list, because it will be on there. Because it's a decent one, but it's also a fairly harmless Stephen King book. I mean, Carrie was insane, and The Shining was insane. Cujo, you had the killer, you had the dog with rabies, and that was just scary. But again, that was kind of a, okay. And Christine's the sort of same way. It's sort of a, okay. And it's one of, as I said, one of King's earliest books adapted into a fairly decent movie. Number 8 is a film that's going to pop up on another one of my lists when I end up deciding to do my most underrated movies of all time. And I find it hard to believe that I actually like a movie with this actor in it, because he is I can't say that because I actually like a bunch of his movies, but the fact that he's a total dickwad doesn't help any. But this is a movie that not a lot of people have heard of. And it's actually a decent film with a fairly decent cast in it. It's Memoirs of an Invisible Man. Chevy Chase trying to do something a little bit different in the early 90s. And he plays it a little bit more calm or so. I don't know if he was told to tone it down a little bit or whatever. But, he's still kind of the cocky sort of Chevy Chase, but he's not anywhere like the Clark Griswolds or the Fletches that we're used to. He's more of a mild-mannered guy who, a businessman, typical sort of Chevy Chase, womanizer type of guy who, in a strange twist of fate, decides to take a nap in a chamber where they're testing an invisibility thing, and it zaps him. Nobody knows he's in there, and he turns him invisible, and he ends up, he needs some help, and ends up finding the girl that he had a one-night stand with, played by Daryl Hannah, who's actually very beautiful in the movie, and tries to get her to help him try to figure out what's going on and how to get better. And he also enlists the aid of his boss, played by Michael McKean, who's playing a nicer version of a character that Michael McKean usually plays. And meanwhile, we have Sam Neill, who is chewing the scenery as the villain, working with John Carpenter again. I think he did this one before in The Mouth of Madness, but he working with him again, playing the villain, trying to figure out either how to use him as the Invisible Man or figure out how to become invisible alone. It's a much better movie than people think it is. Chevy Chase, again, is not a big asshole, because he's kind of this, in most of his movies, he's kind of this uppity kind of asshole. I mean, Fletch is a fantastic movie, but Fletch is kind of a, egotistical sort of asshole. And Clark Griswold is kind of also, yes, he's a family man, but he's also kind of an asshole again too. So he basically plays assholes in a lot of his movies. Three Amigos, was Dusty Bottoms? Yeah. He was the guy that, drank all the water and used lip gloss and didn't think much about it, stuff like that. And was, again, just kind of this stupid whatever. And it was a typical Chevy Chase thing. It's great, but it's the Chevy Chase thing. This is a different version of Chevy Chase, and that's maybe why I like it a little bit more than maybe some of the other movies that he's been in, and is a hugely underrated movie. The effects of the invisibility are cool. You switch back and forth because when you have Chevy Chase, who in '91 was still kind of a biggish kind of actor, you don't want to have him invisible and just have him do voiceover. So Carpenter uses a interesting way of sometimes showing him invisible and then sometimes showing him as Chevy Chase. I'll give you a good example. It's hard to describe. There's a sequence where he's hiding out with Daryl Hannah, and they just had sex. And so they're cuddling in bed, and there's a mirror over the bed. And in the mirror, you just see Daryl Hannah doing the one spoon, and then you see the depressed area next to her in a similar spoon shape, which is where Chevy Chase is. And he's doing some lines, and they're having a conversation. And then when he goes in for the close-up, Chevy's there. You see him in his bare-chested spoon position on Daryl Hannah. But you, as the viewer, know that he's still invisible. This is just to, as again, you don't want to hide your star and just have, Daryl Hannah playing off an invisible space. And plus it saves on CGI because early 90s, there wasn't a lot of CGI. They had to do some different thing. It was really hard to do the CGI and stuff like that. So they had to do this sort of bait and switch special effects sort of thing. But because, Carpenter tends to work with lower budgeted films, he really couldn't do all that much with it. So he just used the trick I just told you, where he pops up as Chevy Chase himself. And the same thing happens during other sequences. I mean, there is a sequence near the end where he's dressed in sort of the full Invisible Man regalia, and that's cool. But then there are others. He does that really just briefly. The majority of the movie is being pursued by Sam Neill and stuff like that. John Carpenter likes to utilize all that. So there might be a sequence where he's running with Daryl Hannah through a street, and you see him as Chevy Chase in a shirt or whatever running with Daryl Hannah. And then there are certain sequences where you cut back and you see him invisible, except for the shirt, because you have to be naked to be completely invisible, but he's wearing a shirt. So you just see no head and no arms, but you see the shirt running with Daryl Hannah. And then it cuts back again to Chevy with her running. So it's just, as again, we're Daryl Hannah and Sam Neill and Mike McKeon and all these people, they're not seeing Chevy. This is all for the benefit of the movie viewers. And Carpenter knows that, again, you can't keep your lead actor invisible the whole time. And plus, special effects are expensive. So we're going to do a little bait and switch. It's sort of similar to what they did in Hunt for October, which they've done in a couple of other movies, not that aren't Tom Clancy related, that other people have jumped on. In Hunt for October, Sam Neill again, Tim Curry, and Sean Connery are all Russian. And you see them when they first make their appearances speaking Russian, and you see the subtitles of what they're saying. But I guess because we're stupid Americans and we don't like to read subtitles in movies, well, a lot of us do, but because a lot of people don't, in this case, McTiernan, who directed it, decided to do a neat little trick where Sean Connery is doing this soliloquy about Russia, and he's speaking to Russia, and you see the subtitles, and the camera pans in to his mouth to get a real intense close-up of his mouth, and then it pulls back, and then Sean Connery is talking English. But he's talking Russian, but because they don't want to have subtitles and they don't want to have them speak Russian for the whole movie, do the whole script in Russian, they do it this way. And that's similar, as I said, what Carpenter does with Memoirs of the Invisible Man. He twists and turns, uses it in specific times to utilize the coolness of the Invisible Man effect, which is really cool. And then at the same time, you still got to see Chevy Chase because it's Chevy Chase. Now, when he's invisible and he's talking, it's still Chevy Chase's voice. Obviously, he's doing the voiceover. But Carpenter just knows the right way to utilize this camera trick for the movie. And it's what actually makes it a fairly decent movie. So number 8 is Memoirs of Invisible Man. Number 7 is one of the most unusual John Carpenter type of films, because you did not expect something like this from John Carpenter. And it spun itself off into a fairly successful TV series, Starman, which is a heartwarming tale that John Carpenter directed, actually, about an alien who comes to Earth and takes the form of a woman's dead husband to try to learn more about Earth, and he and this woman fall in love. That's the basic kind of premise behind it. And Jeff Bridges, I think, is the star in that, in the movie. In the TV show, it was Robert Hayes from Airplane. So Starman is the one film in John Carpenter's oeuvre, as it were, that doesn't fit with John Carpenter. Christine's maybe kind of a close second, but still you've got a possessed demonic car, which still seems like something that John Carpenter would probably end up doing. But this is just a straight up heartwarming, romantic film that just so happens to center around an alien. So pretty decent film. I think it got some good, I want to say it got some good, like maybe award love in some form or another, didn't it? Like maybe it got nominated for some stuff. Maybe I'm just completely misjudging it. Let's see. Starman. Jeff Bridges, Karen Allen, Charles Martin Smith, Dirk Blocker, MC Gainey. Let's see. Grossed $2.9 million its opening weekend, debuting at number 6. It was released the same week as David Lynch's Dune, and 1 week after the release of Peter Hyams' 2010. Film grossed total $28.7 million from, so it wasn't great. The critical response is huge. It's great. Maybe I'm just awards on it. Jeff Bridges was not. Yeah, that's what I thought. Jeff Bridges was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Actor, making Starman the only film by John Carpenter to receive an Academy Award nomination. Bridges was also nominated for the Golden Globe Award for Best Actor Drama and was awarded the Saturn Award for Best Actor. Karen Allen also received a nod for Best Actress from the Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror Films. The film itself was nominated Best Science Fiction Film. Jack Nitzsche received a Golden Globe nomination for his score. So there you go. So it's one of these, as I said, just sort of kind of a absolutely different type of John Carpenter film that you weren't expecting at all, and it's so good also. And I guess every director maybe has a movie kind of like that. With Tim Burton, I didn't put it on my top 10 list, but Big Eyes was kind of that movie where the only real connection to maybe a Burton-esque sort of film was that the paintings are of weird people with big eyes, and that might be the only thing. But the film itself is, well, not the best film in the world. It's kind of boring, actually, for a biopic, but it's not a typical Tim Burton film, and so every director has that in them. And Starman is absolutely a wonderful film. It is such a good film. I forgot how good it was once I seen it, but and it was so good. And I guess, $28.7 million is decent, I guess, against its budget. But the fact that it spun off into a TV show, and it was a successful TV show. I think it lasted a couple seasons, 2-3 seasons, something like that, where basically I think instead of it just focusing on him and the woman, he went and he met other people as he's learning his journey on what the people of Earth are actually like, sort of thing. So, but that's the premise of it. It's a great film. And I bet most of you did not know John Carpenter directed that, because he didn't do the score for it. And it's not a John Carpenter film, but it is, since he actually did direct it, and it's number 7 on my list. So we go from kind, loving alien to undercover aliens trying to take over the world from within. And honestly, with the shit that's going on in this world right now, this film is actually still fairly topical. And is another kind of off-kilter one for Carpenter with no real big stars in it is They Live. Roddy Piper, a wrestler. Now, I have nothing against that. I've always said that wrestlers, no matter what you may think, wrestling is acting because it's not real. I am sorry, I had to say it. It might seem like it, but it's not. It's all acting, and that's why The Rock and John Cena were able to easily slide from being in wrestling to acting. Now, not everybody is successful. Hulk Hogan had such a personality that he couldn't really do it. And Roddy Piper technically had a whole personality also, but the thing was, it absolutely fit this role that they wanted from this. Roddy Piper, Keith David, and Meg Foster. So who else is big in this? Nobody. There is actually nobody who is hugely famous. Roddy, as I said, is a wrestler. In the late 80s, when this movie came out, wrestling was still huge. I mean, it was really huge in the 80s. I mean, it still is huge. But in the 1980s, when it sort of really hit its popularity, it was humongous. So They Live has the iconic line, "I'm here to chew bubblegum and kick ass, and I'm all out of bubblegum," sort of thing. It also has the longest fight sequence between two people in a movie in a back alley, and one of the most vicious ones. So vicious that South Park did a almost spot-on perfect parody of it, where Jimmy, the handy-capable person who speaks with a stutter and his cane and stuff like that, takes on Timmy Liverlaw. And one of the cripple fight is the name of the episode. It's one of the funniest episodes of all time. But those are the things most people remember. There's a few other things as well. The premise, regular dude finds a pair of sunglasses, puts them on, and starts seeing that when he's looking at a group of people, some of them don't look quite right. They look almost alien, and they get anxious when he sees them in the glasses, like that he knows he can see their true skin. He also sees bizarre signs that are almost subliminal, like there'd be a sign right over there on this that I see right now. It says "Store All." He puts on the glasses, and it might say "Listen to us" or "Obey" or whatever. So, and then he takes it off and goes back to say "Store All." It's sort of a subliminal sort of way of getting into your head as a way of trying to take over the earth from the inside out. And again, it probably wouldn't have been as successful if you had, I guess, let's see, 88, like a Mel Gibson or a Danny DeVito or an Arnold Schwarzenegger or a Sylvester Stallone, someone like that, a Charlie Sheen even. That might not have been too bad. Like a Michael Douglas also, sort of thing. A Michael Keaton would have been, well, that might have actually been pretty decent also. Regardless, doesn't matter. Roddy Piper is perfectly cast this role. Keith David, excuse me. I always get those two mixed up. Let me verify which one it is. It's Keith David, I think. Yeah, Keith David and Roddy Piper are perfectly cast in the movie. And again, I don't think it works if you put in big stars at the time. Again, Roddy Piper was a fairly big wrestler at the time, and his persona that he plays off in wrestling actually plays off really well in this movie, and actually, as I said before, does a decent job in the movie. And it's a quick, easy, breezy sort of movie, not real too deep, and it's saying something. It's making a statement about, at the time, the late 80s, how people were, the 1980s was such a wild time in our lives, and things are starting to sort of level off and head down after Reagan was finished his 2 terms, and we were getting ready to have George H.W. Bush as president, continuing the Republican domination in our presidency. And then, of course, we get into the 90s and that all changes. But it's sort of a perfect view of all the excess that we had in the 80s now sort of coming to an end as people are getting older and progressing and discovering, wait a second, this isn't as good as we think it might be. And cracks are starting to show in this facade of a beautiful 1980s, that everybody has this vision of the 1980s being such a wonderful, successful, economical time. And honestly, I got to do a little bit more research on that because I was growing up during that time. In 1980 to 89, I was 7 years old to 16 years old. So that's my growing up time. So I don't give a rat's ass about the economy or terrorism or whatever. I was more involved with playing with G.I. Joes and Transformers and watching Saturday morning cartoons and reading comic books and hanging out with my friends, riding my bike, playing baseball. And then when I got into high school in the end half of the 80s, when the cracks started to show up, that's when I started to understand a few more things because now I was getting older and I was starting to think, okay, I'm going to graduate in like 2 years. I'm going to head off to college. So I'm going to need to sort of get more involved in things. That's why I started seeing this stuff. So that's why the late 80s, where you start seeing some of those cracks in the facade that was the absolute perfectness that everyone claims the 1980s decade was. But there's lots of issues with it we're not going to get into because that's not what we're here for. We're here to talk about horror-esque sort of Halloween type movies. So They Live is still, as I said, relevant today, but it's just a fun, brainless, entertaining film that actually is not quite brainless. It's got something to say about the way life is at that specific moment in time that can be now displayed as something that is a problem throughout recent history. Number 5 is The Fog. Again, I think I probably should have put this one up because I really enjoyed this movie. I watched it again. It's been a while that I had seen it, so I watched it again a couple weeks ago, and I forgot how gorgeous the scenery was. It takes place in West Coast of California, and it's just absolutely the way Carpenter shoots it, just a stunning, lots of color pops. Nice, small little seaside village, and such a great premise also. You throw a little bit of history in there with John Houseman telling the spooky story on the beach at midnight, leading up to the anniversary of the town's creation, about how in the 1700s, 1800s, when settlers were coming in there, they took over the area. It was a highly fertile area. It was a successful area. And then a very wealthy man who happened to have leprosy had a boat full of people who were all lepers, and he wanted to build a leper colony in this gorgeous scenario because being in that sort of location would help their leprosy. And they were anywhere else in a big city, stuff like that, they were ostracized. But they forget that other people, it's not just being in big cities, it's people themselves who don't like people who have sicknesses or look different or whatever. So the townsfolk, they wanted the money because they needed the money to put it into their town and bulk it up, but they didn't want to have lepers all over the place. So they had devised a plan where they said, okay, come on in, you can come on this night or whatever. And when they knew there was going to be some sort of fog or whatever, and they put a bunch of lights on the beach. And at night, where there's not, again, remember 1800s, there's not really a lot of light. It's the sky. There's no light bulbs really so much. There's torches and stuff like that. They see the light, thinking that's like it's a lighthouse or whatever. So the boat heads that way, not knowing they're about ready to hit the shallows. They hit the shallows. It sinks the boat. Everybody on board is dead. And the money that the rich guy has is stolen by the people of this town, and they utilize it to build a church and schools and do it, and then the town prospers. So now we fast forward to present day, which is 1980, I guess. I would assume is when this movie came out, and it's like the anniversary of the creation of the town, and a mysterious fog appears and a boat that is out in the waters at night gets wrapped up in it, and they start getting slaughtered by something in the fog, because something in the fog comes on board the ship and slaughters them. But before that all happens, they see an old school sort of pirate ship right next to them. And then after a bunch of people are killed, the fog dissipates and the boat disappears. And the next morning, they're called they're called as being lost. Nobody knows where they are. Their loved ones, they never came home that night, so they're worried about that. So the river people, the beach people, beach patrol, whatever, they go out there, they eventually find them dead and stuff like that. And so they don't quite know what was happening. And then a whole bunch of other things start happening. And then a priest in the church discovers a hidden book that was, I should probably get back to that. So the night that the fog came and the people on board the ship were murdered, a earthquake-esque sort of thing went off in the middle of the night, which was like the arrival of this vengeful spirit. And it caused damage to the town. And one of the damages was it cracked a hole in the wall in the church, where the priest who is presiding over it finds a diary from his predecessor who created the church 100 years ago. And it was his confession about what they did to the leper and stuff like that. So the priest knows that something's going on. Meanwhile, Adrienne Barbeau, who looks fantastic in this and was actually married to John Carpenter this time. I didn't know that. I thought he was always with Deborah Hill, but I guess I was wrong. She plays a single mom who's a DJ, and she discovers some crazy stuff. And then Jamie Lee Curtis makes an appearance as well. And her mom, Janet Leigh's in it also. Jamie Lee Curtis actually, I think I read somewhere that her role was written specifically for Jamie Lee, and was a new character added after the first couple drafts were written, because he wanted something else in there, and he got Jamie in there. And so Jamie at that point had been playing as Jamie Kennedy. So eloquently points it out in Scream, is that Jamie Lee Curtis always played the virgin in movies, Halloween, Prom Night, stuff like that, those slasher type movies. She's not a virgin here. She's a hitchhiker who gets a ride with the dude, and they end up hooking up at his house and push off a mysterious being. And we soon discover that the fog is the leper and his people on board the ship who are going around killing people to get their revenge. And then the fog just decides to take over the night of the 100th anniversary, which is the 100th anniversary when they died. And the townsfolk have to try to figure out a way to survive this massive fog with the pirate sort of ghosts in it. It's a great idea for a movie, and it's a fairly unique idea. As I said, the sets and the scenery of the location shoot is absolutely stunning. Carpenter's music is not as good as it was in some of his other movies, but it's still decent. And it's a decent movie. It's actually a lot more entertaining than I thought it would be. And yeah, so I like it a lot, and it's number 5. Hello. Number 4 is another sort of John Carpenter-esque sort of action film that was successful enough that it created a sequel. Also had the aforementioned Adrienne Barbeau in it, and also had Kurt Russell in it, who became a regular for John Carpenter later in his career as well. Kurt Russell creates the iconic character of Snake Plissken, a criminal who, let me backtrack again. It's the future, and New York City has been turned into the world's biggest prison. So it's been cut off from the rest of the world, and all the worst criminals in the world are thrown into New York City and kept away from the normal people. And this is their own little, village, their own little city. But it's also a prison because they can't escape it. And that's okay, because they, as expected, when criminals run something, it's going to become anarchy and stuff like that. So what ends up happening is the president of the United States, played by Donald Pleasance, is the plane is flying over New York City, and it gets knocked down and crash lands in New York City, where a bunch of burglars, they know who he, a bunch of criminals, they know who he is. They kidnap him, try to hold him ransom so they can get out of there or whatever. But the government doesn't want to, bow to them, so they bring out Snake Plissken, who is the only criminal to ever have escaped New York City. He escaped New York City, was recaptured soon afterwards, but instead of going back in there, they kept him in solitary. So now they pull him out and they say, if you do this favor for us, we will pardon you or whatever. So he is transported into New York City to try to find the president and get him out. And that's the premise of your movie. Adrian Barbeau's in it. Isaac Hayes, I think, is in it also. And it was successful enough that it released a sequel, which wasn't nearly as good and is not on my list. Kurt Russell, Lee Van Cleef, Ernest Borgnine, Donald Pleasance, Isaac Hayes, Adrian Barbeau, and Harry Dean Stanton. Set in the near future world of 1997. The movie was made in 1981, so it was made after The Fog and before The Thing. So this is actually Kurt Russell's first movie with John Carpenter. And Snake Plissken has become such a sort of iconic character that they've made comic books about him. They've made action figures about him. I think they've even made like a cartoon version of him as well. And it's one of Kurt Russell's most iconic characters. And it's a decent story. Again, a really kind of interesting story idea, high concept from John, who really would think at that time in 81 about a whole city being a prison, and then having the typical cliche of someone who escaped breaking back in. But you got to remember also 81, that really wasn't a cliche at that time. It soon became a cliche due to how successful this movie was. It's a great film, very well shot, good action film. So not really a horror film and not really a Halloween sort of thing. And I know it seems kind of weird. I'm doing a John Carpenter list, but you got to look at the stuff we've done so far. Vampire is a horror film. Christine is a horror film. Marvel's Invisible Man, even though it's more of an action film, has horror connections. They Live has aliens. That's kind of a horror connection as well. And The Fog is, of course, horror as well. And then Escape from New York, along with like a Starman. Starman was a more romantic, calm movie. This is more of a chaotic action film doesn't really have like a John Carpenter-esque feel to it, but it's still decent. But because John Carpenter did such a great job with this film and the story and the characters and stuff like that, he decides to up the ante a little bit. And in mid 80s, reteams with Kurt Russell again for my number 3 movie, Big Trouble in Little China. So knowing full well that he could make sort of a really cool action film, because Kurt Russell, Snake Plissken, plays it fairly straight through the movie. But because Kurt Russell just has that sort of aura about him, John wanted to bring that out a little bit. So he wrote Big Trouble in Little China for Kurt Russell. And the note that he gave him was, you are a guy who thinks he's the hero of the story, but he's actually the sidekick. And it is kind of, when you think about it, it's not really a normal John Carpenter film, but it kind of is because of Escape from New York. But then you throw in the supernatural aspect of it with the Chinese demon god, and that adds to the adventure sort of making it kind of a John Carpenter-esque movie. And the fact that they actually used Asian actors for it is another phenomenal thing. And really, I think it's Kim Cattrall and Kurt are like the only like white characters in it. The rest are Asian because it takes place in Little China, and it's an action film, action comedy more like it, about just a regular dude who's a truck driver who is just in the wrong place at the wrong time and ends up getting involved in this massive adventure dealing with supernatural Chinese god monsters. And again, he thinks he's the hero, but he's not. He's the sidekick to the actual hero, who is the Asian character. I can't remember his name right now. It's been a while since I've seen this movie too, where he wants to go and find his girlfriend, and because his girlfriend's been abducted and is supposed to become the wife of this Chinese demon creature played by James Hong, who's one of the best Asian character actors out there. And it's a fun movie. Big Trouble in Little China is such a fun movie. It's a typical 1980s film, mid 80s action film with loads of comedy in it. Not necessarily playing it seriously, but the story is serious, throwing in sort of mystical, supernatural things. Sort of has a similar feel to The Golden Child, which came out around the same time with Eddie Murphy. And it's that one's a fun one also. But this one, Big Trouble in China, is just it's so much fun. And it's such a great film. And it's sort of another kind of chaotic Kurt Russell, John Carpenter jam, and it absolutely works 100%. Number 2 is, I've talked about it a number of times already, the second time he's worked with Kurt Russell in what is considered it should be considered as one of the greatest remakes of all time, is John Carpenter's The Thing. 1982 was not successful. Was not successful at all. Was a huge bomb. And only later, much like most of John Carpenter's films, does it become considered an instant classic, a cult film, as it were. And it's not really a cult film. It's considered one of the best horror films of all time. It's just 1982 was just not the right time to open it. It was ahead of its time, and it was a more dark, more gritty, more gruesome remake of a silly, not really silly, but a typical 1950s, 60s sort of sci-fi film that was called The Thing from Another World. And so instead of kind of tying it as a remake, even though it's basically the same movie, he does this. And he even sort of hints at this in Halloween, which is his first movie, where they're watching the sci-fi movie on Halloween, and it's The Thing from Another World. And that's the funniest thing in the world. That at the time, it's not an in-joke because The Thing hasn't come out yet. But now when you watch both of them together, you're like, Jesus, it's an in-joke, but it's not, because Halloween came out before The Thing. But we knew that at that time, John Carpenter was maybe kind of obsessed with The Thing, and he wanted to make a remake of it, and he got his chance. And as I said, it tanked, but it kept grinding, it kept away at it, and is now considered one of the best movies of all time, a great horror film, one of John Carpenter's masterpieces. That's why it's number 2, and it's got the premise is great. I think it's the North Pole, not Antarctica. North Pole. A group of people are there to discover and look at a crashed flying saucer, but there seems to be weird things going on. About like another hidden alien sort of making his way through the people at this outpost in the middle of nowhere. And unlike, say, Starman, it's not gentle. It is a more lines of and then the They Live ones were more of the we're going to work from the inside out. This one's like, I want to destroy everything now. I just need to get out of where I am right now and get moving to these places. So it becomes this paranoid sort of thriller. It is still considered a horror film, sci-fi horror thriller kind of thing, where you have a small cast of characters inside an area which is one of the most desolate parts of our country, having to figure out who is and who isn't who they seem. And that's what makes the film so great, and what makes John Carpenter so great is his building and building and building and building of things, where it's just the tension keeps rising and you're not sure what's going to happen. And then something happens and the tension eases. And then all of a sudden he builds it back up again because something else is happening. And he keeps doing it over. And before you know it, after you've watched the thing, you're exhausted. They made a prequel to it. As I said, is a remake of a 1950s, 60s sci-fi movie, and it is considered, this version is considered one of the best remakes ever done. And if I ever decide to do a best remake movie of all time, this is going to be on the list, obviously. Actually, might be a bad one, but I can't think of a whole lot of remakes that are better than the original. But that's for another day. The thing is, John, I'm sorry, I wanted to make the joke where I'm saying everything because John Carpenter likes to put his name above the credits all the time. John Carpenter's this, John Carpenter's that. I think that's hilarious. The thing is just a beautiful practice in building suspense and paranoia, and you feel for them because they're in an isolated place with only these small group of people, and you don't know what's going to happen next. You don't know who's being truthful and who isn't. And that's a scary thing that people have to maybe go through and consider, you know. It's a deep-seated sort of fear of a lot of people, being trapped with a bunch of people that you might not know very well, and they're not who they seem they are, and you need to try to figure out what's the deal before something happens to you. So Carpenter does a great job of building the suspense, building the paranoia, and Kurt Russell plays it well, and the entire rest of the cast does as well. The set, I think he did film it, and they did use the cold weather, sort of snowy sort of stuff. They didn't film it in the North Pole, but they did use sort of to get a more realistic feel to it. And the creature itself is creepy. It is absolutely one of the most creepiest visual effects you're ever going to see. And the ending is still to this day, if you find another fan of The Thing, your discussion automatically goes, what about that ending? And you sort of discuss, and you can try to figure out what their point is and what your point is to see if you match up. Believe it, because it really does end on kind of a downer note, but at the same time, it keeps the paranoia and the suspense going to the final scene. And even then, after the film is over, it's still there. And that's what Carpenter does so well in this film, and also his number one film, which you can pretty much predict what I'm going to say. I'm doing it on 13 Days of Halloween. I've discussed Halloween already, and John Carpenter directed Halloween. So, of course, number one, the 1978 horror classic is Halloween. Was there any doubt it was anything else? Again, people might make a case. As I said, The Thing is wildly beloved now, even though it wasn't in 1982. Some people also really enjoy Big Trouble in Little China. Those Halloween, The Thing, and Big Trouble in Little China are the three I hear most of all of his stuff. The rest, you can still kind of hear something of it. Christine's almost forgettable. Vampire's almost forgettable from people. People don't even realize Starman was done by him. Memoirs of Invisible Man, they don't even know what the hell that movie is. They Live is another one that might get a little bit more love when people think about John Carpenter. The Fog also, and Escape from New York. Those are all kind of ones like that. But that's John Carpenter. And Halloween is John Carpenter's first film, and is the ultimate John Carpenter film. You know, it's the one that sets the stage for who he is as a director. His first film that was released wide. He did Assault on Precinct 13, and he did Dark Star, or whatever that was, whatever. He did other ones before that. But one that was opened, even Assault on Precinct 13 won some awards and stuff like that. But this, and it did open to movie theaters, but Halloween is the epitome of what a John Carpenter movie is. And you can see that in the previous, not all of them, but you can see bits and pieces of what appears in Halloween in the rest of the movies that were on my list. I'm not a big horror fan, never have been. I don't keep that a secret. But I will watch certain ones. I've and just because I like to keep an open mind and stuff. but it's not, I don't seek them out. The only time I seek them out is ta-da, it's October. It's October 22nd, 9 days before Halloween, spooky season. That's when I said, okay, I'm going to push aside any fears or whatever I have, and I'm looking at it. And Halloween, though, is not like every other horror movie. In fact, it is, you can make the case that it created the modern slasher film, which just grew in popularity in the 1980s due to this. Now, to be fair, Leatherface and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was first, but they had it based on a true story, and it's more of a schlocky sort of film, but it's not really a stalker sort of film, because instead of being stalked, the people go to this location and then are decimated by this family that are obviously insane. So as I said, there really hadn't been anything quite like Halloween. And as I said, I think it created the modern day slasher, because once Halloween came out in 78, took off and became a massive hit, you get Friday the 13th, then you get Nightmare Before Elm Street, and then you get more Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Leatherface. You get, and then you start spreading out more and more, and then you start seeing sequels. You start seeing Friday the 13th Part 2, 3, 4, 6, 10, 12, whatever. Nightmare on Elm Street, 1, 2, 6, 7, 8, 9. And even Halloween, you can't escape that, which is not what John Carpenter wanted to do. And you probably heard this story a million times. But John Carpenter and Deborah Hill, who created and wrote Halloween, did not want to continue the story of Mike Myers. It was supposed to be a one and done story. Even with the way the movie ended, that was supposed to, it was done for a reason, the way to keep it open-ended and give you more fear, because that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to make an anthology series of movies set on Halloween, but all are kind of different. But because everybody loved Mike Myers, stuff like that, they kind of were forced to do Halloween 2, even though he didn't direct it, but members of his crew did. And I think he did a script pass on it, and that was it. And then Halloween 3 comes out, which continues to try to follow the trend. It's like, okay, we did 1 and 2. Let's try and get back to what John wanted, because one of his buddies directed number 3. They said, why don't you try to get back to what John wanted to do, and created a story that had nothing to do with Mike Myers, and still called it Halloween because it was still popular. And then it became known as the black sheep of the family because it had nothing to do with Mike Myers, and it tanked. It didn't do well. So then you transport till 1988, when it's the 10-year anniversary, and then Halloween 4 comes out that John Carpenter has absolutely nothing to do with, and you start the path for Halloween Multiverse 1. I talked a little bit about this, I think, 2 days ago when I did the top 80 horror movies of all time. There is a definite multiverse when it comes to Halloween, because it's so sporadic. So you have the original Halloween universe was 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6. And then Jamie Lee Curtis, they convinced Jamie Lee Curtis to come back for the 20th anniversary. But they had killed off her character in number 4. I mean, off screen. It didn't happen on screen. But there she is alive. And you could try to connect it to 4, 5, and 6, because they said that she had a daughter, but she died in a car accident. So why in Halloween H2O would she have left her daughter, which she knew she gave birth to, and made everybody think she was dead? Wouldn't she have taken her daughter with her? Instead, she had a son. And so now we have Halloween 1, 2, and Halloween H2O number 7. It ignores 4, 5, and 6. And then you get number 8, which I don't really want to talk about because it is a fucking disaster of a movie that destroyed all the goodwill that number 7 brought back to the Halloween franchise. And number 8 came out and absolutely destroyed it, turned it into a campy, shitty horror film. And then Rob Zombie said, hey, you know what? I kind of want to make my own version of Halloween. So now you have another offshoot where basically Rob Zombie's Halloween is almost a shot-for-shot remake of the original Halloween with some slight changes here and there to add the Rob Zombie mentality to it. And they made some other changes here and there like that. And then it did, I guess, fairly successful. enough so that he was able to do Halloween 2, which absolutely went in its own complete direction and in a crazy fucking who knows what the hell it was doing sort of thing. And it changed up everything about Halloween. That wasn't successful. So I go back to the drawing boards. Like, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to bring this all back about? So then 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, somewhere around there, a new Halloween comes out. Jamie Lee Curtis has reprised her role. She now has a daughter played by Judy Greer. And she's a paranoid sort of that something's always going to happen. And Mike Myers is still out and about and stuff like that. And that creates its own trilogy. Halloween, Halloween Kills, Halloween Ends, something like that. And that's a new offshoot where you have one. I don't think they counted 2 for that. I think they did 1 and then the new trilogy. So that's another one. So Halloween has all this disjointed stuff. But before we get into all of that, the original film itself is a incredible creation in theater of the mind, as the producer pointed out in a show you need to check out on Netflix called The Movies That Made Us. It's 3 seasons, about maybe 12 episodes, and it's behind the scenes stuff of specific movies. Halloween is one of them. Nightmare Before Christmas, I talked about the other day, is also one of those. And it details the creation of it and the making of it and what happened after and sort of like that. And it is the most effective use of non-gory violence. There is very minimal blood in it. The horror comes, again, as the producer pointed out, is you have this shot, there's all this black space over here, the heroine is right here, forefront, doing whatever. You don't know what's in that black space. And you just build and build and build the anxiety, you build the paranoia, you build all that stuff, the eeriness, the creepiness of something. And then, bam, it happens. And it's effective in that way. And then it calms down, and then it does it again. Calms down, does it again and again. And that's what makes it so effective. Again, another reason what makes it effective is it's not gory. As I said, it's people getting stabbed and sliced their throats, stuff like that, but very, very minimal blood. Very minimal blood. Again, it's more of and that score, the John Carpenter score for Halloween, I'm going to do a top score list sometime down the line. That's in the top 5 also. It is one of the greatest scores of all time, created by John Carpenter, and has the iconic Halloween theme. You know what it is. And that's a theme that plays through the whole movie, but you also have all these other wonderful building up the anxiety music. And then there's a bit near the end where it's finally kind of crescendoing, and it's like a dead end, and it's Mike Myers going after Laurie, and it's just like dead end, it's building and building and building, and you're seeing the crazy stuff that's happening out there. Laurie's running, trying to get into the house. She's been stabbed in the shoulder. She's trying to run the house because she knows she's got to take care of the kids, and she doesn't want to die because she doesn't want to let down the kids. She wants to protect the kids, and she doesn't want to die. Her friends are all dead. There's a madman with a knife who's stalking after her, and he's not running. He's not talking. He's just slowly walking over there, and she's trying to get anybody's attention, and you can see the buildup, the panic that nobody is helping her. They think it's a Halloween prank, or no one believes her, and she's screaming and saying, someone's trying to kill me. No one believes, because it's Halloween. There's probably a bunch of kids, playing, and she's at the time is a teenager, and it's probably just teenagers messing around with us. And then she can't, of course, get into the house where the kids are, who are asleep. So she's banging on the door, trying to wake them up. and they're fast asleep. And meanwhile, Mike Myers just keeps walking right at her, and she's freaking out. She doesn't know what she's going to do, and just builds up. And then you've got the then, and the music is adding to the anxiety of it, because it would be anxious without the music, but you add the music to it, and it just increases the anxiety of it. It still has, just a phenomenal sequences at the end, and a killer ending that is still one of the creepiest that you're ever going to see, and continues, much like he did with The Thing, is building the anxiety up, keep it going, even after what seems like the end of the film. But it's not, because of what happens in the ending. And that's what makes Halloween so successful. It's set on Halloween, so you can obviously say, okay, I'm going to watch it on Halloween. And it's got pumpkins and leaves and costumes and tricks or treats and scary movies like The Thing from Another World. And it's got sex in it, and it's got teenagers being teenagers, and it has very minimal gore, but it has vicious killings and buildup of paranoia and anxiety and tension. And it's just, and the music just keeps throbbing and building and building and getting to you. And it's just one of the best movies ever made. And it was his first real movie. As I said, Saw Precinct 13 is his first major film. And then he did another one, which was like a student sort of film. Did decent, but nothing great. But Halloween is his first major film that says, I am John Carpenter. This is who I am. And then you go on from there, and you get The Fog, and you get Escape from New York, and you get Big Trouble in Little China, and you get The Thing, and you get and then you get Vampires and Christine and Memoirs of an Invisible Man and Prince of Darkness and all these other. And those are the epitome of John Carpenter movies. But again, much like other directors, he decides to go his own way on certain ways as well and changes some things up. And that's what makes him one of the better directors. Again, not one of the, when you look at it, box office potential, is not one of the biggest box office directors of all time. But what gets made up in its place, it doesn't make a lot of money on the tail end of the box office, but what actually makes it be successful is the fact that it gets a cult following after it. And the cult following then uses their power to expand the viewing of the film. So someone who loves The Thing, which was, now Halloween was a huge hit for him, so I'm not putting that into I'm going to use The Thing, because The Thing is, as I said, considered one of the best horror movies of all time, sci-fi movies of all time, one of John Carpenter's best films of all time, but it tanked at the box office. So what happens, it tanks at the box office. John's not feeling too happy because he really hasn't had a very successful film since Halloween. But something strange starts happening. There's a small group of people who absolutely adore the movie, and they start talking about it. So before social media, stuff like that. So they talk about their friends, or they're going off. They watch it when they're in high school. Then they go off to college, and they meet a bunch of new people and said, hey, they're just shooting the breeze, shooting shit. Was like, what's some of your favorite movies? I like The Thing. John Carpenter's The Thing. Never saw it. You just watch this movie, man. So you go, you grab the movie, you put it in there, because videotape was starting to come around there. Or if you're lucky enough, maybe to get a revival somewhere down the line, and cable is starting to come around too. So they need to fill the time. So it might have popped on cable at one time or another. And so they sit the people down, and this person who'd never seen it, he loves the film. And then he goes and tells his girlfriend or his sister or his brother or his dad or whatever, tells him about this great movie he saw, his best friend, and we never saw it. So he says, why don't we sit down and watch it? They sit down and watch it, and then they might end up liking it. So then they start, and so it just starts becoming this big, massive thing. So even though it tanked in 82, by the time you get to like 85, 86, there are people who are talking about how great it is. And so that's what Carpenter does best. The Thing is that way. Big Trouble in Little China was not a big hit, is now considered a cult classic. Escape from New York, I think, was a pretty big hit. The Fog was decent. They Live was another one that wasn't a huge hit. But again, word of mouth, stuff like that. Starman was just it had a different audience, so it was still successful in that end. No one's ever heard of Memoirs of Invisible Man, except for me. Christine was a given anyway because it's a Stephen King thing, and Vampires was just early 90s, mid 90s Carpenter, who is not at his best right now. Prince of Darkness and In the Mouth of Madness, again, maybe not quite as good box office wise, but has maybe not as big of a devoted cult as The Thing or Big Trouble in Little China. But, and a lot of people actually don't really talk much about Prince of Darkness or In the Mouth of Madness. But when they do talk about John Carpenter, those are some of the movies that do come out. So that's where John Carpenter works out best. He might have only had a few minor, huge hits, nothing that was really like $1 billion sort of things, but he did decent other stuff. But he's done films that have high concept ideas, films that he wants to do, that he's interested in making, and actually doesn't give a rat's ass if it's successful or not, because he wants to make movies. He likes making movies, and he enjoys doing what he does. He works with his buddies, and just it's what he loves to do. He doesn't give a shit what you think about it. He's making the movies that he wants to, and he doesn't give a shit if you think he's egotistical by putting John Carpenter above the name of every one of his movies. That's just who he is. And he's still considered. I'll give you one last story, and then I'm going to end the show. This is a more recent John Carpenter story. So there's this, I guess, website called Letterboxd, and John Carpenter has a fan club. And someone posted a screenshot from Letterboxd on Facebook last week, 2 weeks ago, something like that. And it was John Carpenter. It has name John Carpenter, and he's a subscriber to Letterboxd. And I guess Letterboxd is like a movie review site. I need to check it out because that's what it is. I might have to get on there and start, doing some of this stuff on there. He goes on Letterboxd, and the screenshot shows a bunch of mini reviews that John Carpenter, the director, apparently made about movies. Not his movies, movies that other people have made, including Halloween 2, where he blasts everything about it. And it seemed like at the time, the way it was written, and it wasn't outlandish or it seemed realistic. People truly believed that John Carpenter had gone onto Letterboxd and was writing all these little mini reviews. They thought, that's kind of cool, man. He's a movie guy. He likes doing that. They asked John Carpenter about it, and he's like, fuck is Letterboxd? It was a fabrication. I don't think it was AI. It might have been AI, but it was a fabrication. And John was like, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. What the hell is Letterboxd? And so but it was such a screenshot that got a lot of attention because it was John Carpenter. That's why he got a top 10 list during 13 days of Halloween. Because the majority of the movies he works on are sort of types of films you can put on during a spooky season marathon. And then there are some that, you just watch whenever you feel like it. Big Trouble in Little China does not really fit into a spooky season sort of film, despite the Chinese devil god that there is. It's more of an action comedy film, which would be something fun to watch just whenever you feel like hanging out with your buds and watching just something silly and stupid. Escape from New York is another one of those. It's a more cynical version of the action film. It's not a comedy. It has its moments, but it is, again, a social commentary. They Live is another one that's social commentary, but just kind of not really fit into the spooky season one. And even Memoirs of Invisible Man, even though it's about Invisible Man, is, again, more like an action film. But then you get the vampires and the things and the Fog and Halloween and Prince of Darkness and The Mouth of Madness, vampires, all that stuff is horror related. So that's why he got what he did and why he got this list. And also, my Letterboxd story proves that he's still a well-loved and respected director, even though he really hasn't done anything in a few years now. But people still like him. And these are just some of the movies about why people like him. Halloween, of course, being the epitome is the main reason why it's during 13 Days of Halloween. It's a film I watch literally every Halloween night, usually, unless things are going a little crazy. I might watch it the day before, but or the weekend before. I will watch Halloween sometime in the next 9 days, something like that, 8 days, 9 days, even if it's on Halloween. Thank you for hanging out with me again. Another good episode. I enjoyed it immensely. I'm glad to see I'm getting a bunch of views, and thank you for spending some time in your day hanging out with me and listening to my ramblings. The full video will be placed on my social media, and is always going to be on my page anyway. So if you don't have my social media or don't want my social media, which is fine, you can subscribe to my page or just put my name in the system, and you should be able to find it pretty easily if you know where to look. Tomorrow should be, the problem is I haven't actually ranked them yet. I've got my list. I just haven't ranked them yet. And I've been doing it at work because I didn't have a lot of stuff to do. So I've been sitting down and just sort of ranking it. So I'm hoping that a certain employee shows up so I don't have to do their job again like I did today, and I can just sort of kill some time to rank this so I'll be ready for tomorrow's episode. I'm going to have to, because I have to be ready for tomorrow's episode, but tomorrow's episode should be the best Stephen King adaptation. So it's not a books, it's the best adaptations of Stephen King's works, and that includes movies, TV shows, TV miniseries, stuff like that. And there's actually surprisingly a lot of stuff out there, and it's giving me a little bit. So I don't exactly, I'm still trying to determine the exact number because I still have a whole list. I have to, as I said, I have to go through it. I have a general idea of what ones I want to look at, and I still have to rank them, but there still might be some more in there that might be like, maybe I should add this. So I don't know if it's going to be 15, 20, 25, 10. It's not going to be 10, I'll tell you that, but he has so much stuff. It's probably going to be on the heavier side of 20 to 25 list for this show. 20, 25 seems about reasonable. 80 would be too long. And honestly, I don't like all the adaptations that have come out there. So 20 might be a decent size. 15 might also be another good one. So as I said, that's stuff I'm going to have to deal with. I got to definitely deal with it tomorrow. So here's hoping I get it. I mean, I will get it done eventually, even if it means I have to do it during my lunch hour, but rather do it during my work time. I get paid for it. Thank you, and see you tomorrow. Happy Halloween-ish, 9 days away.